And welcome back. If you recall previously, we had gone in here and we said, hey, we have this player character, we can move them around, but of course, we have in here a problem. We don't have that player turning around when they want to face. And the way we are, of course, going to have control that is we're going to have to change our velocity in here. So we're going to have to change this so that we, for example, when he's, not the velocity rather, but the movement of the character. So we're really trying to change the X into a minus direction so he flips around and is facing the other way. One thing I do want to change here before I get too deep in that, I'm going to change my speed real quick here. I'm going to just slow him down, maybe try 5 here and just see how that works. Because he is going just a little faster for my liking here, so that's a little bit better. And of course I can play or tinker around with that as I need to. But let's go ahead and pop over into our script to go ahead and get started. And so in here, let's go ahead and create our new method. We'll just call this one. You can call it flip sprite, flip direction, whichever way you want to move with this. I'm just going to call mine flip direction. How about we call it flip sprite direction? That sounds even better yet because that's going to be very forward with what this is doing. And of course, it's going like, hey, you don't have a method. That's perfectly fine because we're going to generate that method and delete out this exception here. And now that this method exists, we can actually go ahead and start adding our code that we need to it. And now what we want to do is, of course, take this sprite here. We want to transform it. We want to effectively say, hey, we want to take and make a vector 2 that's pointing in that opposite direction. And the way we're going to handle that is with a transform command. And we're going to use what is known as a local position. This is something we haven't really seen yet before, but that is simply just saying where that position is locally. And we're not going to do a vector 3 here. Sorry, Visual Studio. We actually want to make a new vector 2 here. And in that vector 2, of course, we're going to have to pass in some new parameters. Now for this, because we are going to have to deal with situations, for example, when there is no input left, right, have no velocity, we have to, of course, approach this and how do we handle things with 0? Because we don't want to have the game be like, okay, which area are you actually pointing here? So instead what we're going to do is use a math command here. And what we want to do is, of course, have a float command here that's going to be able to handle this. And of course, we have a whole bunch of different ones in here that are available to us that we can use. That's simply just a math function. But the one that we actually want to use here, if we kind of go down a little bit, is the math.sign function. And we want to, of course, pass into that some value because it doesn't know what are you actually trying to get the sign of. Well, what we want is actually our player rigid body that we created earlier. And we want the velocity of that because we want to, of course, know what is the direction. And we want which direction? We want the X direction here because we want to, of course, pull that X direction. And now, of course, you can see we still have a squiggle mark here because we need, of course, have a Y coordinate in here. Sorry, again, Visual Studio, we're not going to use our recommendation today. Instead, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I just want that to be 1F or 1 full because I want to keep that exactly the same. We're not looking to make any new changes to that Y direction. Effectively, it's going to end up keeping whatever it's set in from here because we don't want to affect this value. We want to just keep that in here. And so, of course, we got a good change here. So let's just test out, make sure things are working the way we expect them to. Oh, my player character apparently got moved here. So let's just go ahead and make sure it might be a result of me messing around in the game world here. So I may have to adjust that just a little bit. Yeah, he's down here. I don't want him being that low. So let me just go ahead and make sure that he is not there where he was originally starting. So I'm actually just going to move him to a new drop point here, see if that helps any. It might, of course, be a result of that rigid body there. Yep, there it is. And, of course, here's where I made an error. We used the wrong local command. I made a local position instead of a local scale. So that should fix that because we actually don't want to change the position. We actually want to just change the scaling here, so the direction that we would want it. So my player sprite, of course, is up top here again. So now we run up. There he comes. He's popping into the world. And so now if I go ahead and move him left and right, hey, look at that. He is changing direction. So that is awesome. So we, of course, are now having correct movement, but there are a few things that we still need to clean up when we look at 0, because if I release, you notice he's snapping back to the right here. So as soon as I release that key, boom, he's snapping back to the right, because it's treating 0, or 0 velocity, as a positive direction. So we need to clean that up there. So let's go ahead and handle that issue there where we saw. So let's go ahead and add in here. We're going to make a bool here this time, and we say, is player moving horizontally? All right, so is player moving horizontal? And that's a great way to kind of say, like, is this actually happening? All right, so once we have that established, then what do we actually need to set that equal to? Well, just like how we've done mathf here, we're going to want to use that again because, again, we want to use that mathf value. And we, of course, are going to want to, in this case, get the rigid body here. We want to, again, get that player rigid body velocity to x. But we want to be a little bit more precise. We actually want to use the absolute value function here, so ABS. And then we can use our player rigid body. And we're going to use our velocity X. And Visual Studio is trying to be helpful here, but that's not quite what we want here. Instead of saying is less than player speed, we can normally just say, hey, if this is greater than 0, that would be saying like, hey, this is, of course, moving in the positive direction, which means we're moving to the right. However, sometimes you do encounter some weird issues with 0. So instead of saying it's greater than 0, we can actually use a different math command. So there is another math command out there, math f epsilon, that can actually handle kind of the same thing, but it's a little better when we deal with some of these weird rounding behaviors like this. So again, we're just going to use math f dot epsilon. We can see it pops right up. And again, this is saying if it's close to 0. So this is going to handle, like, for example, very minute cases. For example, is like 0.00001. It would treat that as a 0 rather than us having to explicitly see that it is 0, which is really helpful when we have, again, small little use cases. It just cleans it up real nicely there. And then lastly, of course, since we have a bool, we're just going to create a quick if statement. And so if player moving is horizontal, we're just going to accept that. And I'm going to move my curly bracket down and tab that over so I know that's part of that if statement. And so that should, of course, clean that up. So let's go ahead and test that. And so here in Unity, let's go ahead and drop our player from the sky. Here it comes. And so now he's moving. And so now he's moving. And you can see, there we go. We, of course, are having our player move left and right. And when I release him, you can see he's staying facing to the left. You can notice he's not cycling into the correct animation because we haven't yet handled to say, hey, when you're moving to the left or moving right, when we're moving, we want to switch into these like player walk or player run animations. So that's something we're going to have to handle in the future. But for now, we, of course, have our player sprite able to move back and forth.